All right. Well, I'm not going to do a fancy intro. We are rolling, so we may as well get into it. Welcome back, guys, to Adventure Fit Radio. I have Alan Duffy with me here today. He's an astronomer, which he's just told me is also the same as an astrophysicist. So, sounds cool if you say both, I guess. But, mate, I'm going to introduce you. You can tell us all about yourself. Firstly, before we do, I noticed I was doing a little bit of research and, I'd heard your accent before. I've seen you on TV and heard you on radio, and I saw you interview Neil deGrasse Tyson. I was at that show with Thinking.
Oh man, how good was that?
Yeah, it was great.
That guy's incredible.
It was great. And then so I was doing some research, and I saw I Wikipedia'd you.
The ultimate source of truth.
Yeah, that's right. And I saw, is it true that you're an English-born, Irish-raised Australian?
yeah. I guess if you want to get the whole litany of nationalities. Yeah. So I was born in Peterborough, 35 odd years ago in England, and then pretty much immediately went to Northern Ireland, was raised, and then, come 18, left like everyone else does in Ireland, and just followed my way, eventually found myself in Australia, and I was lucky enough to become an Australian citizen after I think the shortest possible time you could manage to do it, actually. I was pretty focused.
You hold the record.
I think it was, I could
Congratulations.
well do it. I think, anyway, like 5 years. So basically, targeted E457 PR.
You were just on Tinder as soon as you got here. Got to find a wife, got to find a wife, got to find a wife.
Well, actually, that was the thing. I mean, and I do have an Australian wife, but I actually wanted to become an Australian independent of my wife's status because... and indeed, I was a sex as an Australian citizen before I even proposed to her. But because I wanted Australia, I wanted to have that statement of we want you here as one of us. Yeah. And not because you were fortunate enough to marry one of us.
You force you in.
Yeah, that's right.
So well played, mate. We know we can't get rid of you now, but
yeah, that's right. And that comes from a country where Northern Ireland has, I don't know if you know any of the history, a little bit of a challenging question about national identity, right? That is a source of conflict and division. Whereas for me, getting the chance to in a positive sense, declare a nationality, to say I want to be an Australian, I want to contribute to this country, that was an amazing moment for me. It was a very tearful, emotional experience where, for the first time, the question of identity was positive. There was no animosity. There wasn't a century civil war basically for as long back as you can go. So that was a big moment for me, and it was a pride moment.
That's great. That's awesome. So interestingly on that, so Northern Ireland. So you're raised in Northern Ireland. So are you talking about the fact that Northern Ireland are UK, Ireland is right. Ireland. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. So do a lot of Northern Irish sit on one side of the fence, really, we're our own nation, we're part of Ireland, and some sit on the side of the UK, so to speak?
Yeah. So it's not quite 50-50, but it's probably getting close. So you have the those who would choose to remain with the United Kingdom, called Unionists, and their opposite counterparts would like to see United Ireland, the Republicans. There's there's actually, I think, a growing number of people perhaps now in the middle who just think, well, actually Northern Ireland has had a unique history, certainly, since its creation in the last century. So is that, can it go it alone? Can it remain itself, even if it were to become part of Ireland, for example? So, it's a fraught topic. There's no easy answer on this, and there's certainly been no easy experience over the years. But one thing that's struck me most is it is a unique upbringing. There is a unique sense of humor. There's a very dark sense of humor. You get to there's a film just come a series on Netflix, right? Just come out called Dairy Girls, which is all about. It's kind of like the in-betweeners, right? It's the growing up, coming of age, school-based experience, but set in Londonderry, which is just genius. So basically you have these girls trying to figure out their way through, adolescence, and do boys like me? And meanwhile there's like bombs and riots going on, and they don't care about any of that. And that's what's so incredible at Northern Ireland. It was the depth of civil war, but that was just background, and you're still just everyday experiences. That's what you concentrate on. That's what obsessed you.
100%.
Yeah.
That's I just finished reading A Diary of Anne Frank.
Oh wow, yeah.
And have you read that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very similar to what you're talking about there. It's like I was expecting all of her thoughts to be around what was going on outside of the walls, but it was all going on. It was all about what's going on inside of the walls and in her immediate relationship. So yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, cool. So how did you get into becoming an astronomer? How did that all happen?
Yeah, right. So I was always fascinated by the night sky, and some of my earliest memories in Northern Ireland are looking out of the car window, driving in between these sort of country towns. And that's the thing about Northern Ireland is there's a lot of cows, a lot of farms, and not a lot of streetlights. So you get these beautiful views of the stars. And I was always fascinated wondering what they were. Face pressed against the cold glass of the car window, to get a better view, and that was fascinating to me. But it wasn't really. That was just one part of the things I was curious about. I was very curious about, the world around me, geology, all of these kind of amazing things. And then I read Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time as a very precocious teenager. Maybe I think I was like 13 or something. Whoa. I tried to read it.
That's a record as well.
Oh, man, I did not understand most of it. And in fact, I reread it recently on his passing, and I was like, man, I really did not get much of that at all.
Yeah, still don't get it.
No, yeah. So that was enough for me to realize there were bigger and more fundamental questions out there. And that you could actually have a job in asking those. That was something that just blew my mind. So it really wasn't until going into university that, I took physics at University of Manchester, and there's, Brian Cox floating around, and that was pretty cool. And that was the beginning of my realization that, I might be able to do this as a job. This is crazy. But I couldn't choose. Like, I couldn't settle on any specific physics topic, so I picked Cosmology, which is literally the study of everything, the study of the universe. And slowly over time, kicking and screaming, I've been focusing ever more on a specific question of dark matter. This invisible stuff makes up 5 times more of the universe than everything we can see put together. We still don't know what it is. I suspect we'll know in the coming 5 years.
Really?
Only because if we don't, our detectors hit a fundamental barrier.
It's all or nothing.
It's basically all or nothing, and then we have to have an entirely new technological approach.
Really?
Which
So it's
will
like
set
you have
back.
to scrap everything. If it doesn't, if this system doesn't work, then you've exhausted this system of discovery, and you have to start again. Basically, is that?
Yeah,
what
that's
I'm
basically it. We're looking at what are called directional detection. So in other words, we are there's this constant hurricane of dark matter just streaming through us as we speak. So this is the idea that the galaxies are held together, gravitationally speaking, by this massive cloud of dark matter. It's matter because it's got gravity. You can quite literally see the stars and gas of the galaxy pulled in strange and unexpected ways by this invisible gravitational partner. The stars are getting whipped around in ways that are just not explainable in any other sense. But it's dark because we can't see it. So there is this cloud of dark matter, and we know that our sun is going around the galaxy. And this gives a headwind effect where, familiar to anyone who's driven through the rain, as you're driving, the rain is falling vertically. And yet, especially visible at night when you've got the car lights on, it's just at that last second, it looks like that falling rain just whips towards the window screen, right, at great speed. Now, of course, that's you going through it. And in the same way, our sun is going through the dark matter cloud of our galaxy, meaning this dark matter is whipping towards us at the speed that our sun has traveled through it. So we're looking for this dark matter headwind. Now, if we don't find it in the next 5-10 years, and this is essentially the next generation of these detectors that wait, sitting underground, protected from other things that can bash into them, like radiation from space, these detectors essentially wait to be struck by the dark matter. Now, if they don't see it, if these detectors, if we have to continue to build them bigger, more sensitive, wait for this ghost-like dark matter to finally collide, sooner or later they get big enough that they actually see the particles we call neutrinos coming from the sun. So this is a lot of physics, but basically
doing my PhD in 30 seconds.
Yeah. Basically, we know if if we don't see the dark matter in the next few years, if we have to build our detectors bigger again, because essentially this ghost-like dark matter can travel through us, travel through solid walls, travels through the Earth, or like collision. Hopefully, very occasionally, it will collide with an atom of our body, for example. You'll never have noticed that, but we make for very bad dark matter detectors that we're building these better ones. If we don't detect that, then the sun is producing these neutrinos, which are very similar sort of ghost-like particles. We will be blinded by that. In other words, our detector will be so big, we'll be detecting the sun even when we're at the deepest cave imaginable, even protected from every other source of radiation from impact to isolate our experiment. The sun will be blinding us from underground, traveling through the entire Earth, its particles. So that's where this is our nightmare, that if we don't get the dark matter in the next 5 to 10 years, this current generation of technologies, our detectors will be blinded by neutrinos from the sun. So it's a tricky situation. We're sort of getting to the end of a near 40, 50-year quest. And if we don't get it this time, we will have to basically develop a new technology path that can distinguish these neutrinos from the dark matter. And that will cost probably another 5, 10 years. And at that point, I'll be like, oh my God, I'm going to be 50 or 60.
I'm moving on, guys.
I'm out of here. I'm tapping out. So,
right.
For very personal reasons, I want this to be discovered, and I want it to be discovered soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you must feel the same way as the guys at like SETI, they're just always cracking away trying to find intelligent life. Let me just ask one question, because when you were talking there, because I pride myself on asking the questions that my listeners are thinking.
Sure, right.
Because our listeners are not astronomers. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, that's cool. I probably went too deep too quick.
No, it's all right. It's all good. So, but you talked about the dark matter headwind that you can see when the Earth is basically pushing up against it. Not at the Earth, the sun is pushing up against it, and you can see the pull of the dark matter, or that the resistance, I should say. How can you see a resistant force pushing on the sun, or the sun pushing into it, without detecting it fully? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, right. So we have this this invisible cloud of dark matter, some kind of new particle, right? We just do not know what it is. But again, there's absolutely staggering amounts of it that can hold the entire galaxy together. So as our sun is moving through this cloud, we will the entire solar system is going in the same direction, the Earth as well as the sun, and we'll see a headwind effect. So at this stage, this isn't saying anything about what the particle is, if it's bumping against us. We just know it's rushing through us, or rather we are rushing through it, just like we're driving through the rain. So what we hope is that very occasionally the dark matter, rather than flying between and indeed even within the atoms of your body, never colliding with the particle itself, the center of the atom we call the nucleus. That's a tiny target. That is... We think solid matter is solid, right? I mean, I'm touching a table. I can feel the chair pushing back on my legs as I sit in it, right? I'm not falling through it. But that sensation of a solid table or a solid chair is no physical contact between the solid particles. It's actually the repulsion.
It's funny, isn't it?
It feels solid, right? You can tap it, right? But we know that it's actually... the cloud of electrons around the atoms in the table are repelling the electrons in the atoms in my finger to give that sensation of being solid that I can't push through. Now, if you don't care about electrons, electric fields, if you're this dark matter that just doesn't see any of that, then actually solid matter presents a very small target. It is anything but solid. There are gaps in solid matter, if you don't care about these electrons, are essentially everything. The nucleus is a very small target, which is why I can have 100 million particles a second go through just my eye from this dark matter. And I will never see any of that collide. It will quite literally never hit one of the atoms and reveal itself. So we have to wait, because sooner or later a particle will collide with the nucleus. At that point, it sends the nucleus, the center of our atom, reeling away. and that will give a little flash of light. Certainly will if it hits one of our detectors. So what we're looking for is this very occasional collision as a ghost-like dark matter particle slams straight into the center of the nucleus of an atom. And that's an insanely small chance of happening. You can wait for days, weeks, years at this point for that to happen. So the moment it does, that will open the floodgates. I mean, that will be the Nobel Prizes will be handed out at that point.
It's like the gravitational waves, basically, that was just waiting for that one stretching of the, forgive me if I'm wrong, stretching of the space.
Yeah.
The stretching of space, I guess.
Yeah. And that was, but just a tiny. I mean, my God, I think we have a hard time in dark matter studies. Gravitational wave. I mean, the stretching was equivalent to a 10,000th the size of the nucleus. This tiny thing I'm talking about, and it's 10,000 times
insane.
smaller than that.
That's hard to actually comprehend
the way you comprehend it is, which is no easier to be honest, but it's the distance. It's a hair width change in the distance between our sun to the nearest star. And we saw that hair width.
Oh, geez. How good's science?
So
far
good.
out.
So good.
What is going on? That is insane. Crazy. So, funny story, actually. I have a friend who's got a Silicon Valley autonomous car startup. It's called Zoox.
Yep.
And they're in the race against Apple and Tesla and so forth. And he's just really good at like schmoozing with people. And his laboratory, or like his testing grounds, is on the same laboratory as Caltech in wherever in Silicon Valley. And he took us for a tour there once, and he actually convinced one of the security guards to give him upgrade his card, his security card, so that he could get into the room of the original particle smashing machine.
Oh, right. Nice.
Yeah. So I've been there.
Radioactive.
He's like, he probably shouldn't have been in there.
Yeah, it's probably why it's locked.
He was like, I shouldn't be taking you guys in here, but I spoke to the security guard and got the access, and he took us in this room with the world's first. Maybe it wasn't the world's first then, because it wasn't like, there wasn't radioactive, tape, do not enter kind of stuff around it. But he took us in there and he goes, have a look at this. This is the world's first particle smasher. He knows probably about as much about science as I do, which is bugger all.
Right.
So maybe it was just some other machine, but it was pretty cool. I thought, wow, what am I doing in here looking at this? But anyway, look. So we've talked about dark matter, Alan. So that's obviously, especially for you because it's your field of research, one of the most pressing questions in all of space. What are the other things at the moment that fire you up? Other things that you would say are like the big important questions that, I mean, aliens is one. I love asking astronomers or astrophysicists what put the ingredients of the Big Bang in the pinhead. What happened before the Big Bang.
Yep.
But what fires you up about the bigger questions in space and science?
All right. So quite a few. I mean, aliens definitely one.
Probability.
Yeah. Look, it's a case of. And I'm sure your listeners will be aware of the Drake equation, but essentially this is a way to break down our ignorance of the ultimate answer of how many communicating civilizations are out there. But you basically can figure out, well, how many stars are there, how many stars that look like our sun, how many sun-like stars have a planet like Earth, how many of those have conditions for life. And you basically, at that point, you've gotten to a number which in just the last couple of years, thanks to Kepler, the satellite, and other observatories, have now spotted some of these planets. But we realize that there are 4 billion Earth-like worlds, Earth 2.0s, in our galaxy alone. So then you ask, well, what's the chances that we are the only potentially habitable one of those 4 billion that is inhabited? And that's a hell of those are crazy odds to bet against, right?
100%.
That's like going against Winx or something, right? Like, it's going to lose the next race.
Prohibitively short odds there.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, I haven't a good enough handle on biochemistry to see is this a reasonable supposition that we are the only place? Is this that chance alignment of complex molecules that began to replicate themselves? Is that just so insanely unlikely that in 4 billion worlds over the course of billions of years and countless interactions on those planets in these primordial soups, that ours was the only one. Because when that happens, when you first get the replicating molecules, then evolution will take over. They'll begin to, the molecules will combine, they'll add together to form, essentially they'll use up all the available molecules to reproduce themselves. Maybe there's a slight difference where one molecule now, the mutation is slightly changed, and I can break the other molecules and it will start to outgrow them. In other words, you begin to get an arms race between these molecules, and very quickly those molecules begin to demonstrate quite clever techniques to outcompete one another, and the arms race escalates, and before you know it, evolution is in full swing. I don't get why you would stop at any point. It doesn't seem obvious to me, short of some massive environmental issue, asteroid strikes or the planet explodes or the sun explodes, why that would stop. So I don't have a good answer as to why we don't see any aliens, but the key is we haven't seen any aliens.
Yeah.
So one of the questions phrased by Enrique Fermi back in the 30s, a great fit. In fact, I think he may have used your the atom smasher in Caltech at one point. But where are they, right? And
the Fermi paradox.
The Fermi paradox. And there are many attempts to answer this. Nick Bostrom, famous Oxford philosopher, described the great filter, and that we would hope to see, essentially there's 2 points, there's at least 2 points one could imagine this roadblock kicks in. Either it's at the very beginning of this story that it is just impossibly difficult to find molecules that replicate themselves and allow evolution to take over, or it's at the point just before you begin to communicate as a civilization or begin to colonize other stars that something kicks in.
Yeah.
Because if you don't stop a civilization from spreading, then even conservatively by some of his estimates, it takes about 20 million years, max, I think he worked out 100 million years, to colonize all the stars. Unless there's some, and it doesn't take much for a species to colonize. We haven't yet gained the ability to travel between the stars, but a billionaire is doing exactly that, Breakthrough Starshot, Yuri Milner, and that's going to be an extremely interesting effort to see if we can do that in the next 20 years as he plans, just to send a tiny postage stamp-sized satellite spacecraft. But ultimately, were we to continue our technological progress, spread to the asteroids, begin to access that level of resourcing, then it begins to become imaginable. You might be able to move between the stars. And once you start to spread, essentially there's nothing, it becomes very unlikely you'll ever get stopped, right? If you're in one planet, one asteroid strike can take you out. If you spread throughout the solar system, now you're talking, something of the order of a gamma ray burst, some insane high energy event to wipe you all out. You continue. Once you're into multiple stars, it becomes very difficult to stop you. There have been, if there are millions of potential alien civilizations in the past, it becomes very hard to imagine what stopped all of them, right? Yeah. And that's the Nick Bostrom sort of argument of the great filter. It would only take one of them to spread to the stars for them to be everywhere.
Yeah, it's like a snowball effect. Once they start, that they should continue to go.
Exponential growth.
But let's look at here's my theory around that. Let's look at from the dawn of time on Earth and how many different species of animals have come and gone in that time, and how many are left now. And then there's us. And for 4 billion years or whatever that our planets existed, as far as we understand, probably from 1960 to now, there's been a species on this planet that's had the want, or the know-how to, try and expand onto other planets and stars and think about it and realistically have the science to do it. And let's say, for example, in 100 years' time, I don't know what I think about global warming, but there's a lot of things that could wipe us out, that we're letting go. So we might have, of the 1 zillion different species that have lived on this planet over 4 billion years. There's been one species for 150 years. So that's that hair to the next solar system of probability that one of ours, and we've had life for however long, 3 billion years, or whenever life was probably
about
formed.
3.5.
Yeah. So like the Fermi paradox and the Drake equation, trying to figure out, okay, this is how many solar systems, this is how many habitable planets, all that all works out cool. And then, as I actually interviewed a guy from SETI, the main guy, I forget his name right now, top of my head, but they're
Frank Drake? No,
not Frank Drake. It's SETI. I've forgotten it right now. It was about 2 years ago, but
made an impact.
It's actually great fun, but I'm in the throes of trying to explain the universe here, so
that's cool. We'll keep
my
on
brain's
task.
working overboard. Yeah. But so we're looking at we're looking for radio waves, and we're looking for a hair, every planet that may have habitable life.
Yeah.
We're looking for that needle in a haystack across all fronts. So even I get it, and are we alone? There's a lot of reasons to say that why hasn't one life force gone and colonized all of space and so forth. But at the same time, like if you look at us, it's so infinite. We're the only data that we have on life, So if you look at us, it's so infinitesimally small that some life form on Earth will actually ever make it to other galaxies and solar systems before we ruin the planet.
Yeah. So, I mean, you might hope that another alien civilization would be a little less, suicidal.
Seth Shostak.
Yeah. Oh, right. Seth. Right. Yeah. Cool.
Sorry. Cool. Yeah, I love Seth, and I was
he's good.
Why can't I remember his name?
So, I guess what you're hoping for in the argument of Nick's would be that other civilizations are not so crazily suicidally hell-bent on destroying themselves and their own ecology and planet. So
we're unique, aren't we?
We seem to be remarkably self-destructive in that regard, or short-sighted. Is that every possible intelligence you could imagine that could arise in these billions of years? Because our galaxy is much, much older than our solar system. Our solar system has relatively come lately. So is that to say that we would be the prime example that every intelligent civilization is inherently self-destructive? That's a possible great filter. It's hard to imagine that every civilization would fall over it by this point, but maybe it's so unlikely that you get to be a technological civilization. Maybe it's opposable thumbs. Maybe that's the key evolutionary trait. I doubt it, but maybe that's it. And that's very rare, and hence we're the only ones that got to this point, and then we're going to fall over. So, I find it fascinating. The discussion with SETI about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. We're trying to search with radio waves. We use the Parkes Radio Telescope as part of Breakthrough Listen. We are, in fact, most radio telescopes have a capability to tag the unexpected, the unknown. We at Swinburne, in fact, have a few of the Breakthrough team there doing this, actively searching. We're searching in optical. We're searching in beginning to explore, what are the other possible means of communication? Because you're trying to second guess the aliens in that sense. And maybe we'll never hear anything. Maybe we'll never find anything. If you don't look, you'll definitely not find. So I don't think it's a bad... I don't think there's anything wrong with doing the search. What I find most enjoyable about the search, however, is that it asks... It actually guides our own questions about ourselves. We begin to imagine, is this short-sighted what we're doing to the planet? You begin to think on longer-term timescales. You begin to imagine what are the range of possible actions, because we seem to be taking one, but maybe aliens are taking others. And you just, as with most science, it's really a question about us. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, really turning the focus back on ourselves, and we begin to imagine how would we communicate. And that itself can be quite a telling experience, because I think we are communicating in the sense of we're just leaking radiation, radio bubbles, out into the cosmos of our radio signals, of our televisions and the like.
Sound of Tesla floating through the ether.
Yeah, indeed. So look, that's going to be so confusing to anyone who picks that one up. But look, that's cool stuff. But what I love about it most is the fact that we are daring to not just think, but to actively search for what would arguably be the greatest scientific or philosophical discovery imaginable.
100%.
It's just mind-blowing stuff, and we are living that right now. And if that isn't making someone get a thrill or a shudder,
Just
even
gave me goosebumps.
you know, then you're not imagining the consequences enough. Just to pick up an alien signal, it is worth the pittance that we spend on it.
100%.
I would love to do it more. And I mean, effectively, it's Yuri Milner bankrolling it in this generation's approach with Breakthrough, Russian billionaire. I just think of the ways it would change us as a society. Now, sometimes I'm cynical and think, well, it probably wouldn't at all, actually. We would be stunned, but by the next week, we'd be back to the news cycle, right?
Yeah, we'd be back to the Kardashians.
Yeah, that's totally right. And that's because humans, our greatest strength and arguably our greatest weakness is our ability to normalize the abnormal, the extremes. We can live in the most extreme of times. And
we have artificial intelligence in our iPhones to a degree.
Sure.
Not artificial intelligence, but we have magic.
It's incredible stuff, right?
50 years ago, that's magic over there. And we're just like, oh, no, that's just Siri. Now, she's just telling me the weather in, Calcutta right now. What's weird about that?
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. I have an artificial intelligence system. That's just... And actually, we hammer them, right? Like, we talk about how bad Alexa is or whatever. And it's like, sorry, you're criticizing this computer that's telling you your calendar for the day and how to get to that place the fastest. So, yeah, we're pretty good at normalizing the extremes. And, that's one way that we manage to live in these extraordinary times. It does present, I think, a challenge for longevity, however. We don't seem to think about existential risk. We don't realize true risks. And that's not just climate change. We're talking soil degradation. We're talking the acidification of the oceans, the destruction of marine as well as land ecosystems.
Yeah, we don't see the macro, do we? We're so focused on that making our life in the micro all good that we will sacrifice the macro of everybody's life at the same time.
Yeah, look, and at the same time, we do also need to look after ourselves and I just think we don't do a very good job of looking after either the planet or ourselves. Typically, we're so focused on here and now that we, and being in the moment that, and ironically not actually living in the moment truly, but always in a sort of meditative sense, but we actually find ourselves so distracted by gadgets or just Facebook's news feeds that we don't actually begin to think of, how can we live a healthier, better life? How can we have a healthier, better society, healthier, better planet? We don't really ask those big questions. And I was taking the tram in today, and I was looking around, and, usually I'd be on my phone and I'd be, reading something, I would hope, that was, reasonably educational, right? Sometimes, BuzzFeed. Sometimes you just do a top 10 just because you're bored, but some kind of listicle. But I was looking around and everyone's on their devices, and I was kind of trying to be a bit nosy and see what they're all doing. And the vast majority of the time, it's social media. It's not... I don't think that's as enriching an experience. I don't think that's the most enriching experience that person could be having at that moment. And yet that was the experience.
Degrading of the mind.
Yep. So that worries me, that I don't think we're equipping ourselves for the long term, and I don't think we're equipping ourselves to think and dare to ask the questions that we need to be asking to survive in this next century, let alone to colonize the galaxy.
Yeah.
Maybe social media is the filter. I don't think, I think that's a uniquely human fixation, however. I suspect that most intelligences don't go this way.
I think it's the worst thing to happen to, Steve Jobs, when the iPhone and the smartphone came out. We were like, oh my God, look at this.
Yeah.
I block myself from my phone from 7:30 p.m. till 7:30 a.m. I can get into calls, bank, Uber, like a few things like that. And then all the other apps, I'm blocked, and my housemate has the code to get into them. It's a real pain in the ass sometimes, because there's always something that I actually need right here, right now at 7:45 that I'm but I'm so heavily addicted to it and other people's lives and junk news and junk whatever that it's the only measure I could take. I tried everything to put my phone to grayscale, deleted all the apps, locked myself out with the code, so I had to break through that wall of annoyance. None of it worked. So now I'm just I'm locked out, and I can't get back in from 7:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. because it's not good for us. And we could talk about social media forever, but I want to ask you something about something that came up in that last that last thing that you were talking about, which was the importance of, like, if we were to discover the greatest discovery that would ever come to fruition, which is, you know, probably alien life at this point. So I have a theory that at the moment, the way that the world works is the world is filled with us and them, you know, and we have a number of different things that create that. And religion is one of them. Nationalism is another, you know, sexual preference, blah, blah, whatever, you know, all this stuff that we go, hey, I'm me, they suck, they're over there, that's them.
Yeah, right.
You know, and I feel like the greatest thing that could happen to us as a species that could actually, you know, pull us together would be, one, an asteroid rocketing towards us, and Bruce Willis and the Armageddon team getting out there and bust, you know, a worldwide effort like that. Okay, facing our own mutual destruction, outside of our own destruction, doing it ourselves, to ourselves. And then secondly would be, that would really bring us together. And secondly, and more powerfully probably, would be alien life, but probably intelligent life. You know,
that's right.
I suppose if we find microbes on Mars, I don't think that's going to do anything. But if we found intelligent life and we could prove it, you know, finally we're us and they're them.
Yeah.
And I feel like, apart from the fact that scientifically it would be the greatest, you know, discovery of all time for a multitude of reasons, so, like, societally, I feel like it would have the biggest impact that anything could ever have in the history of mankind, really.
Yeah, look, I'm sort of optimistic, and I hope that would be the case. I think we would certainly have a real sense of us and them, and humanity works on a tribal nature. I mean, that is deep in our core. And, you know, if our tribe were to encompass the entire planet, I have to think that's a great thing. That's could be the best thing that could happen. So, you know, that certainly is an optimistic view of it. We could end up finding ourselves instead looking to the outsider, to these aliens, and essentially normalizing that away. And then within, you know, next week we sort of go back to our divisions, because we don't, you know, there's a sort of, I'm trying to think how real this is, but you get, you know, like the London Blitz, right? And there was a great sense, people speak of the coming together. And, you know, that was facing an external enemy, and maybe that was the case, but pretty quickly it all went back to normal after, right? So, you know, we have to go beyond having an external threat to make us love one another, or to feel at least less animosity to one another.
Yeah, that's right, actually. That's a good point.
So, look, but humans being what they are, I suspect that will be our shortcut in our tribal psyche for, you know, maybe the next century. Maybe we do get better, though. Maybe artificial intelligence ends up showing us the other, and we realize what it is about ourselves that we have in commonality as a species, and humanity in creating the alien. And I suspect we'll create an alien intelligence before we ever find one. So I think artificial intelligence will be that. That will be enough for us to say, okay, well, I have more in common with my sisters and brothers, because I've now seen what the other is, truly what the other is. But, you know, humans are pretty good at finding division or creating division, because that's just how we're hardwired.
Yeah, competitive, because we needed to compete to survive, I guess.
It gets back to the molecules. It's all the way back to those initial molecules, right? The sense of replication of you know, prioritizing your genes or your inherent structure. That is the fundamental. And our intelligence allows us to think beyond that, to ask bigger questions, demand more of ourselves than our biology would allow. But that's not something that comes for free. We have to struggle. We have to strive for that. And very few of us ever achieve, I think, true enlightenment in that regard. I certainly haven't. I certainly don't. You know, I grew up in a country where it was very much the other. And I can assure you that you still had fights with your schoolmates, even though you were one side of a fence versus the other side. Right? So, you don't...
Postcode wars.
Yes, you don't get... Yeah, that's right. So you don't have a free pass on building a happy world by having an external threat or this alien. Like, we will still have to solve all of our same challenges and problems. Maybe they become slightly easier because we can see that there's this other, but you know, I suspect that it doesn't change that fundamental issue we've been having for millennia. Essentially, this is as old as humans have been able to think, has been this challenge of resolving the other, and we haven't done it yet. I don't know how much technology helps us in that. If anything, arguably, our technology has atomized us to a greater degree. We all have our own individual news feeds. We don't even share the same world anymore. We have our own facts. So that worries me a lot.
That's an interesting point.
So maybe we can't rely on that. Maybe we have to get back a bit more to basics. But I did realize, actually, I spoke about the alien thing as being one of the big questions. It's actually not the biggest question. For me personally, the two bigger questions, setting aside dark matter for now, is the nature of consciousness, because that is just fundamentally blows my mind. I don't know enough about it to speak about, but it just wow. And the other is what came before the Big Bang. Now, is that even a physical question? If time arose in the event of the Big Bang, then there really isn't a question to say what came before. It's like what's north of the North Pole, right? You've reached the point. So that to me is a truly stunning question. The fact that we can even measure the age of our universe, 13.6 billion years, with an error bar that's better than I can estimate your age. That is, how is that not something we have tattooed or something? That should be a constant reminder of how audacious we are as a species.
We should be walking down the street going like this every day.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's very impressive. I think the problem with what's before the Big Bang is because the power of our human brains combined and all the greats before us and, standing on the shoulders of giants scientifically and all that stuff, there's obviously a process that, I believe, there's obviously a process that our brains cannot fathom. Because at the moment, I mean, this is probably been discussed in your areas and people that, that you kick around with, but if you think of time as a linear thing, and here's where it started at the Big Bang, well, what was before that?
Yep.
Okay, so you can just keep doing that forever. That's an unanswerable question, because you go, oh, well, what happened with the pinhead is there's a process that went on for blah, 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 and what started that process? You get caught in that swings and roundabouts. But the thing is, there must be a process that our brains cannot fathom. So I don't know if it's what happened before the Big Bang, because maybe time started at the Big Bang, like you say, but it might be, what process do we live under? How does this work? Is time a cyclical thing, and where we're getting back to the start of the Big Bang? And we don't understand how that would work, but there's obviously something that we don't grasp right now, I feel like. And I feel like it's not a when does it start thing, it's how does it work thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, we would hope that a fundamental description of nature, and this is described as a theory of everything, which eluded Einstein, that would have the answer, right? So that's the process we live under. Each stage of scientific discovery has allowed us a greater insight into the universe, and has allowed us to ask deeper questions and even more challenging questions, right? Before we realized that general relativity was the correct answer, we could talk about an eternal universe, which avoided then the challenge of, well, what came before this? It's always been like this. We know from general relativity that it's not possible to have an eternal universe, or at least not one that remains visibly the same. It changes. Stars inexorably pull one another together. We now have dark energy, which is apparently inflating the universe apart. It's going to look different 10 billion years from now than it did today, and certainly 10 billion years ago. So we can see that there's a change. Well, it's obviously human instinct, and we did it as 2-year-old, 3-year-olds with a why, and we asked that question then, of well, what did it look like at the start? And we can get to, depending on your flavor of physics, we have an image, quite literally an image of the universe as it was 380,000 years after the Big Bang. That's the cosmic microwave background. For maybe the older listeners, when they had their old analog TVs and the aerial was there, and you would lose the channel and it would all be a static hiss. About 1 in 100 pixels on your screen was you picking up that afterglow of the Big Bang. So you were performing cosmology as you're trying to tune into, I'm guessing, like Hey It's Saturday or something in those days. So that was, that's not bad. And then we can go to nucleosynthesis, so the formation of the elements themselves. about 3 minutes after the Big Bang, when the universe was so hot and dense as to be the similar conditions to the center of our sun, right, where new elements are forged. And we look around and we see the abundances match what we would predict. So we can see, and air quotes, what the universe was like. It was like the center of the sun. And then maybe you push the start time back to the energies that we explore at the Large Hadron Collider, the atom smasher in CERN in Geneva, and that's now getting us to, a billionth of a second after the Big Bang. To go much earlier than that takes even higher, you're talking about a universe of such extraordinary densities, temperatures, energies, that we can't recreate that on Earth. Now, we have a theory called inflation that, I don't particularly want to get into, but there's a sense of how the universe could have arisen as we see it today, and that's now going to the Planck time. That's 10 to the minus 35 seconds. I mean, that is just an extraordinarily small window of time. There is an imprint potentially detectable from that on the universe, and we can call that primordial gravitational waves. About 5 years ago, we thought we detected them, and we have not. We realized it was essentially dirt on the camera lens. It was dust in the Milky Way, but it was effectively on the camera lens.
Was Ralph here last night? Ralph said he cleaned last night.
Yeah. So that was a bit embarrassing. So that was, but then it doesn't answer the question, because of course you could always say, well, what came before that, right? And at some level, Planck time is that's where that question breaks down. If you get to that point, you're with your 2-year-old, 3-year-old kid, then one, they're a genius because they've got to that point. But you have to stop. There's just a fundamental point of it breaking down. And even the theory of everything that eluded Einstein, that we talk about the quantization, or the quantum meets GR, so quantized gravity. The description of the small meets the description of the very large in general relativity. That would end. That would have to have as its most smallest quantized step would be the Planck, because to go smaller than that has no meaning. That's what we suspect, but will we even ever reach that? Who knows? And it doesn't really. It's not clear that would still answer this question of our origin, which is what drives, I think, a lot of science, or a lot of scientists, is the same thing that I think drives a lot of us, and certainly would drive those amongst us with, a sense of spirituality of, what is my place here? What was my origin? What should I be doing, or where should I go? I mean,
the meaning of life, yeah.
The meaning of life, that's right. So we have those kind of basic questions, and science can answer a number of them. Again, it comes back to consciousness of trying to answer the others, to give, essentially consciousness gives meaning to the physics that we see around us. And that's a really extraordinary idea, and it's still not clear to me that we even need consciousness in this universe. I still can't quite believe it. Like, the more you think of it, the weirder it seems. But that aside, we do have a sense that our technological process is accelerating, that this new era of machine learning, so AI-driven research, is really just beginning, but that could have extraordinary consequences, extraordinary insights, and maybe it does take a certain different type of intelligence to be able to answer some of the things that we don't yet know. We haven't quite been able to pose the question appropriately, but those are sort of in the future. I like to think of what we can do in our everyday lives as people, and flex that questioning muscle, and that's something I try to encourage my students certainly to do, but in my general public talks as well. It's try to be a bit more observant. Try to ask questions of the world around you. We're looking at glasses of water at the moment. We can see reflections. We can actually see there's some shadowing, right? It's a transparent glass. How is there a shadow being cast? Just look at a clear glass of water. How is there a shadow being cast?
Yeah.
Right? So it's because there's a certain bending of the light, focusing of the light, like you have glasses on your eyes to do. And that means if some light is being focused, well, and some areas becoming brighter, well, obviously some areas will have to become dimmer, right? Because the light's being focused. So right there, you've got the diffraction theory of light. You're actually seeing light as a wave. And there are other experiments you can do that will show it's a particle, right? So you can do these mind-bending things. In other words, in your daily life, you can begin to observe and ask the questions, and it becomes a bit of a thrill. And this podcast is part of that experience of asking those kind of questions and daring to find answers. Maybe you just talk to someone who knows the answers. Maybe you go on a deep dive through Wikipedia to get the answers yourself. For me, the more important thing is that you're trying to get answers, that you're posing good questions, that you're trying to get answers. You can do, you can sort of practice that with, and we sort of talked about this in the scientific context as citizen science, where scientists are trying to actually tackle problems that are just too big for any one research team to undertake. I just launched with my colleagues across in Poland the Credo app, which has actually turned your smartphone into a cosmic ray detector. These are the feeding black holes, exploding stars, kick out these particles, they crash into Earth, unimaginable energies, and they're actually the things that we blind our dark matter detectors, actually. So part of the reason we go a kilometer underground, like we're doing in a gold mine in Stowell, Victoria, is to shield us from those cosmic rays. Well, they're fascinating objects in their own right. We want to build detectors that cover the world to track the very highest energy events. One very sensitive detector is a smartphone, and they are everywhere. So you can install the Credo app, you block your camera lens, and essentially it's just constantly taking pictures, because occasionally a cosmic ray will slam through the detector and trigger it. You'll actually see a streak of light on your camera. And we collect that then automatically get transmitted back to HQ. And if a number of people have the app and see the similar time, that kind of cosmic ray, we know we've seen a truly gigantic cosmic ray shower hitting the Earth at that point. You can begin to explore the very highest energy scales, unimaginably greater than anything we could build on Earth, just using your smartphones in this manner. I mean, those are the kind of, that to me is the unique and ever optimistic positive side of our technological progress. The fact that, the same devices that we can, poison our minds, limit our minds with social media and other sort of distraction tools, can also enable us to become scientists and to probe questions that, quite frankly, are beyond imagining. I mean, just how to create a particle of such energies. I mean, I worked out recently, basically, some of these cosmic rays are to a normal particle interaction what, a nuclear bomb is to you throwing a baseball, right? These things are insane energies. How can you create them? We actually can't figure out at this stage how to create some of the higher energy ones. But you can be part of that journey. And that's just one of those citizen science projects that use your smartphone, that use your eye as well, right? We talk about the Zooniverse. This is a website where we post astronomical images that our machine learning algorithms, our AI, can't classify, can't figure out what's going on in there. The human eye is still better than any machine at pattern recognition, especially when it's an unusual, like the unexpected. That's what humans are great at spotting. That's what you get to be part of in this new paradigm of citizen scientists. And what I hope is that the more you do of that, the more you want others to join you in that search. And we actually get a feedback loop of interested, scientifically minded people finding others, beginning to join that search, to begin to ask those deeper questions, rather than just scrolling or double tapping a like or a heart. They begin to think, I could spend my time more profitably, and I could begin to search for the deepest questions imaginable. That, to me, is the paradox of our time. The same train ride in that lets you scroll your feed, you could be trying to classify unique and never before seen galaxies.
You could scroll the universe.
You could scroll you could swipe left or right, and that to me is the weirdest paradox of our time, and why I still want to have optimism and hope moving forward, because I think, and I want to believe, that we're going to get to a stage as a society that we recognize that a lot of the distractions have their place, that it's fine to be distracted, but not all the time.
Yeah.
That you want to exercise your mind and that you want to have that thrill of discovery when you learn a new fact, when you see a new thing. That once you start to get that, it becomes habit forming, just as the social media channels are inherently habit forming. We can hopefully have a journey of discovery that is too.
Absolutely. Alan, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to have to get you back in. I want to talk about, I could really continue that conversation right there. I want to talk to you about why science is important. It's one of my questions, Danny. One of my bigger questions. We didn't even get anywhere near it. I want to talk to you about consciousness. I want to talk to you about AI. They're the next three things we're going to talk about. And next time we're going to get 2.5 hours blocked.
Yeah, right. Sounds good.
Mate, in a couple of minutes, because we've got to get you out of here, quickly give us a wrap of where people can find you, plug anything that you need.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the Credo app, CREDO. It's on Android at the moment. We're trying to get it ported to Apple, so that's the search for cosmic rays. You can find me on the socials. After everything I've just said, I genuinely only post what I hope are interesting things. I try not to share anything that's not. But Astro Duff on Twitter, and or just head to the website alanrduffy.com, and you will find me and all my latest activities there.
Beautiful, mate. Thanks for coming.
Thanks
that was awesome. Cool. That's a wrap.